Hello friends, and welcome to my 2025 challenge where I have a blind date with a book and a blind date with a bake. So before we get started, let's go ahead and have a little recap of what happened last month. Let's go ahead and figure out what we're baking next. So random page, let's do this one. Chocolate Whiskey Bundt Cake. I was gonna keep trying to read it, but I can't read Italian yet. So this is what we're going to be baking. I'm not the best unwrapper when I'm holding it up in the air like this. Okay, ready? Ooh, on Earth, We Are Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. I've been wanting to pick this up. So, as we know, I was supposed to read On Earth, We Are Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong and bake a delicious chocolate whiskey cake, which I must say I was successful with. So again, 2 for 2. I got January done. I read Matt Haig's How to Stop Time, almost forgot the name of the book, and I made Melissa Forti's date cake. This one is now her chocolate whiskey cake, and I've finished also On Earth We Are Briefly Gorgeous. So before we get too far into my thoughts about Are We on Earth We Are Briefly Gorgeous, I just want to remind you that at the beginning of this video we'll do kind of like a little baking montage. I'll tell you what the book is about, and then we'll do a non-spoiler kind of section where I just talk about my general thoughts about the book and if I would recommend it or who I would recommend it to. And then the last part is actually going to be spoiler filled, so don't worry. I'm going to go ahead and put chapters down in the description below so you know where to go. But at the very end of this book, make sure you at the very end of this video, make sure you stick around because I will be kind of opening up my next blind date with a book. So I have the rest of my books that are wrapped up here, and I have Melissa Forti's cookbook right here as well. So we'll be able to see which book I'm going to be reading for March and which bake I'll be baking for March. Sound good? Perfect. So let's go ahead. I'll tell you what the book is about. On Earth We Are Briefly Gorgeous, and we'll have a little baking montage as well. Again, I won't be sharing the recipe because it's not my recipe. It is Melissa Forti's recipe from the Italian baker. So if you do want these recipes, I highly recommend buying this cookbook. It's been fantastic. I love every single bake I've baked out of it. And this is part of that challenge where I'm going to be baking at least one recipe from this cookbook each month, so that way I can, 1, be baking more often, and 2, I can bake these fantastic, wonderful treats. Now, baking montage, and what is this a book about? I might also read a couple passages depending on how much time we need to do for the baking, so just as a heads up. On Earth We Are Briefly Gorgeous is a letter from a son to a mother who cannot read. Written when the speaker, Little Dog, is in his late 20s, the letter unearths a family's history that began before he was born, a history whose epicenter is rooted in Vietnam. At once a witness to the fraught yet undeniable love between a single mother and her son, it is also a brutally honest exploration of race, class, masculinity, and our current American moment. Immersed as we are in addiction, violence, and trauma, but undergirded by compassion and tenderness, the question of how to survive and how to make of it a kind of joy powers the most important debut novel of many years. Quote from page 171, "It's in these moments next to you that I envy words for doing what we can never do, how they can tell all of themselves simply by standing still. Simply by being. Imagine I could lie down beside you, and my whole body, every cell radiates a clear, singular meaning, not so much as a writer as a word pressed down beside you." Quote from page 186. "They will tell you that great writing, quote unquote, breaks free from the political, thereby, quote unquote, transcending the barriers of difference, uniting people toward universal truths. They'll say this is achieved through craft above all. Let's see how it's made, they'll say, as if how something is assembled is alien to the impulse that created it, as if the first chair was hammered into existence without considering the human form." Quote from page 231, All this time I told myself we were born from war, but I was wrong, Ma. We were born from beauty. Let no one mistake us for the fruit of violence, but that violence, having passed through the fruit, failed to spoil it. So before we actually talk about the book, let's talk about this cake. I just want to talk real fast about it. This cake is awesome. I think it's very different. Unfortunately, I think mine is a little bit more denser than her cake. I think my baking soda might have not been great, or I may have not whisked my eggs for as long as I should have. So it's more of like a brownie cake, but two things. If you don't like chocolate, don't eat this cake. It's not a cake for you. And two, if you don't like whiskey, I also don't think this cake is gonna be for you, because there is only like half a cup of whiskey, Scotch, in this cake, but it is so, what could be a good word to describe it? It is so there. You can really tell that the whiskey is in this cake, that when you take a bite, even smelling it, you can smell the whiskey, the Scotch, but if you like Scotch, then 100% you should be baking this cake, because the Scotch tastes so nicely with this chocolate. So you boil or you melt the chocolate, the cocoa powder with the butter and also the whiskey, so you get this nice like kind of molassesy texture or substance, and then you mix it with the rest of your ingredients, so you get kind of like a nice like richness, because you make sure the cocoa powder blooms inside of that butter and also with the whiskey, and it just turns out being really, really delightful. I didn't have the Scotch that Melissa Forti's recommended, so I used a different type of Scotch. I can't actually remember the name of it off the top of my head, sorry. But this Scotch is a little bit smokier. It's also a little bit more woodier, so there's a little bit of kind of a woody flavors in it. It's really nice, and it does match really, really well with this chocolate cake or the chocolate inside the cake. But if you're a chocolate lover and a Scotch lover, this cake is made for you. It is so good, and it's like, at least because mine's a little dense, it's like a drunken brownie. And it's really, really tasty. You can't eat very much of it, so that's kind of like the perfect marriage, I would say, because I can eat a slice and then I can eat another slice an hour later. So it's not a bad thing. It just means my cake lasts a little bit longer. So, cake recommendation, 100%. Bake it if you like Scotch and you like chocolate. So that is the chocolate cake, the chocolate whiskey cake. Very, very delicious, and I wanted to talk about it before I got too far into the video and forgot to mention it before I start talking about spoilers. So I hope that's okay. I hope you enjoyed the little montage, and I'll eat the rest after the video. But I just wanted to mention the cake is delicious and it turned out fantastic. Now, let's get into this book. First of all, no spoilers of this beginning part, so don't worry, don't fret. We're gonna just talk about kind of the general idea of the book, the general feelings, and then what I generally thought about it. Very general. I have a cup of coffee here, so if you haven't got yourself a cup of coffee, I recommend grabbing one, or a cup of tea, cup of water, whatever is going to quench that thirst, and grab yourself a snack, because we're gonna dive into this very thin book that is filled with wonder and pain and just feelings. So Ocean Vuong, if you don't know, is a poet. So he started out his writing career in poetry. I have another one of his collections, his poetry collections, which is Night Sky with Exit Wounds, I believe. I've read about half of that poetry book. I really did enjoy it. I don't generally read poetry very often. I have a hard time understanding it just because I've never really, one, grew up with it, but I also have never been kind of introduced to it. So it does take a little bit longer for me to kind of get into the poetry, and it takes me quite some time to figure out what the poetry is actually saying or what it's referring to. So just so you understand where I'm coming from before we jump into this novel, I really do love his style. I think his style is raw and painful. It has a lot of truthfulness to it, and it's not for everybody, I must say. On Earth We Are Bleeding Gorgeous is not nonfiction. So it does take liberties in saying or in telling parts of Ocean Vuong's story. However, it is not all true. There's only parts of it that are ours. So kind of keep that in mind as well. This book is kind of hard for me to talk about, not because it's too painful, but because the story is just really heavy. It's very, I don't want to ever criticize any experiences anybody's ever gone through, and because I don't know how much or what parts of this novel are his true story and not his true story, I want to be very careful about how I talk about it. Not because I didn't like the story, but because there were parts of this that I felt were hard to grasp for me, but I'm wondering if that's because of how it's written. What I mean by that, I'm gonna try to keep this organized, so sorry if I'm all over the place. But what I mean by that is that, as I mentioned, Ocean Vuong started his writing career as a poet. And so this actually comes off very poetic. There's a lot of rhymes and imagery built, sentences and prose. There's a lot of different types of structure than you would normally find in a normal book. The book is written as a letter to his mother. So Little Dog is our character. He's our main narrator, and Little Dog is writing the story to his mother, and it's a letter just depicting the way he grew up, the way he felt growing up, the way he saw the world, and the way he felt the world saw him. So it's very just kind of all over the place, but very poetic, because the story's jumping here and there. There are these lines where it'd be one line and then you would kind of jump to another part of the story or another part of his life. It was very almost broken up as like a book of poetry. So you have in a book of poetry one poem, and then the next page would be a different poem with a different story. And that's kind of how I felt this writing was set up, where there were times when I'd be reading a section. So this book is broken up into different pieces. I'm trying to find maybe a good example. This is a very good example. So you have a page like this, and each of these are actually different ideas. Sometimes the ideas belong together, but sometimes you would be jumping to a completely different idea. So sometimes I use sometimes a lot, sorry. But there are times where I felt like I had to tie the story together, or I had to try to remember different parts to make sure I was understanding it. Maybe it's just because I am not a big poetry reader, so I'm not used to something like that, where if you buy a book of poems, sometimes that book of poems is carrying a whole idea and you have to tie the idea together. Again, I'm making assumptions right now. I don't know for sure, and I feel bad for saying kind of things like that, because maybe I need to be more educated before talking about On Earth We Are Beautifully Gorgeous. But those are just my general thoughts. I think this was beautifully written, especially if you're somebody who likes poetry, who can really get into poetry. I think this book would be really, really perfect for you. If you're somebody who doesn't read poetry, I don't think this book is not for you. I just think that it takes a level of concentration, so making sure you're actually in the story, taking the time to read it, taking the time to get in the imagery and the actual idea from the author. And then it's fine. Because once I actually was like, okay, I need to make sure I'm paying attention, I started gaining more information. I started putting the puzzle pieces together, but I think that's also part of how the story's just built. It's built to put the puzzle pieces together, to kind of see how everything is built together, to see how each individual thing affected Little Dog's life, how his grandmother's unfortunate life circumstances in Vietnam, especially during the Vietnam War, affected how his mother was, and then how that affected how he grew up. And then also just his transition from moving from Vietnam to the US. Yes, he was a baby when he moved to the US, but it's still that transition of understanding that he's different, and understanding that he's somebody that's not like everybody else. He's from a poorer family, or it's not just a poor family, he just looks different from everybody else. So you're having a lot of this pain and confusion from this child who's growing up. But not just that, you're also having a lot of heftiness and confusion from a child who doesn't understand his own feelings and his own body, in the sense of what he wants and who he wants. So the story is beautiful. I think it was really well written, in the sense of how the fact that it's differently constructed than another novel I would normally pick up. I think this was definitely wonderful to pick up because it took me out of my comfort zone. I would definitely read it again. I would pick up some poems from Ocean Vuong, some other poem collections to try to understand how it's put together more. I would also pick up other poems from other authors. So, general consensus, I liked this book. It wasn't perfect, but I do feel like I loved the experience reading this novel. I felt for Little Dog. I unfortunately, or thankfully, never went through the pain and suffering that he had to endure. This is, I don't think, a story that's too off or too out of the ordinary for many, many people, and especially people who have immigrated into the US. And especially right now, there's just so much coming in question. And this was a really weirdly heavy book to read at the moment, because it wasn't just me looking at the life of this young boy, teenager, and man, but it made me kind of look at what's happening right now. And so there's just, this was just a really heavy book. I caught myself feeling very weighed down when reading it, where I just felt almost overwhelmed with how difficult the conversation about this book would be, but also how difficult it would be to be in this situation, and how it's important to have the conversations about this, and how it's important to understand the stories of other people, and how important it is to just be there and to not just look at people as others, but to understand that we are all the same. We all have to function and live in this world of ours, and how just because you look different, your personality is slightly different, your hair color is different, your eye color is different, you have 9 fingers instead of 10 fingers, just because you're different doesn't mean that you're not the same. Those are just physical traits, but in our heart and in our soul, if you want to say, we're all the same as just wanting to just make it through this world. So that's how this book made me feel. And it made me want to understand other people. It was not an easy read, but it was a wonderful read. It's not, unfortunately, a 5-star book for me, just because I think the structure was very different for me, so I wasn't able to dive in as deep as I would like to, but it's still a very, very good book. I recommend this for anybody who is looking at trying to understand different perspectives and different lives and different heavinesses in this world, and also to be able to empathize and sympathize for different cultures and people coming from different situations. It was a really beautiful book, and because it's written with poetic prose, we're looking at it in a different way. And so Ocean Vuong did a wonderful job. This is a debut novel. I think it's a very different type of novel, like I mentioned. And if you're looking for something heavy, but something also moving, I think this book is really for you, and something that I would recommend you picking up. Even if you're not a poetry reader, even though I mentioned it was very poetry focused, or at least with that rhythmic and imagery kind of structure. But it's worth the challenge, and I think you should read it. Yeah, so On Earth We Are Both Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong, a very, very good book. Hefty, but good. So I'm going to leave my unspoiler section there. Like I mentioned, I don't know how to talk about this book really, but I do think it's a book worth talking about. So I would love to hear your opinions if you've read this, what you think of it, what you got out of it maybe. And I know my thoughts were really kind of all over the place, but without being able to talk to somebody directly who's read about this, it's really hard to kind of put your thoughts together. Like I mentioned, it's kind of put in different chunks, so you're trying to put this puzzle piece together of this young man's life through the years. And it can be complicated and convoluted. It can be complicated and messy and life. So if you've read this, I would love to hear your thoughts. Make sure you don't put any spoilers in the comments below, or if you do, make sure you put like spoilers and then enter, and then you put your spoilers so it warns other people not to read your comment. I would love to have a discussion about this because this book has definitely made me start thinking a lot about different situations and different life situations and how it's messy. Life is messy, and I would really like to talk to you about it. It'd be fun. I would like that. So let me know what you thought of this. If you did read it, if you haven't read it, let me know if I've convinced you to pick it up. I'd be curious, and I'm gonna dive into spoilers. So if you're not wanting to hear spoilers, make sure you dive out, and spoilers will be in 3, 2, 1, spoilers. So yeah, this book is a lot. I'm going to talk about the 2 main sections separately. So we have the first section, which is like little dog's young life, his childhood, his relationship with his mom before he went to the farm to work, because then that's going to be the second part, where it's his sexual relationship with Trevor. Okay, so it's his sexual relationship with Trevor and how he kind of comes into who he is, and what that means as his character, and also his integration into society in that way, I guess. So those are the 2 parts I'm going to talk about. Let's go ahead and talk about his relationship with his mom, because this little letter is a letter to his mother who can't read. And I find that really interesting because there is something I learned way back. I took therapy a couple years ago, and there's something really just healing about writing a letter to somebody even though they'll never read it. And I think that's maybe how I felt about this, because I've also written a letter to somebody who I knew would never read it, but it felt good because it was a way to get out some of the feelings I had, some of the frustration or sadness that I had regarding this person, frustration I had with this person, and it was very healing because it was no longer in my head, but it was actually out on paper. So I wonder if there's a part of Ocean Vuong, because this is not a memoir, it's just pieces of his life that he's included in here. There's some also fictional pieces, but I wonder if there's a part of him that actually feels that he wrote to somebody, and I'm wondering if that's why it carried some hefty pieces with it, and some very like resonating pieces, at least for me, with it, because saying dear mother and then writing a letter to somebody who you know will never read it is just, it sounds ridiculous, but it's a healing process as well. And I think that's what this novel is. It's just a healing process for this character, little dog. I mean, we follow him talking about his mother and how his mother wanted to love him and care for him, and there was always that love. We always saw that love. However, there was also violence. There was also, we would read parts of this book where she would hit him, and you feel angry towards the mother. But there was also parts where Ocean Vuong would write about how the mother would care for him, for little dog, in a way where you sympathize for her. It was very interesting because you're getting this very weird depiction of a mother who is not the perfect mother, but who loves her son wholeheartedly. And so we don't just get his story of his mother, but we also get kind of like pieces and parts from the grandmother, and how the grandmother tells parts of the mother's story and tells parts of her story, how we see and hear about their life in Vietnam during the Vietnam War and the pain and suffering they went through there. Just all this disaster, losing your home. I mean, the mother didn't finish school because the school was bombed when she was in, like, I think kindergarten, when she was 5 years old. So there was no way of her actually to learn to read, to write, to do any of this, because everything was taken away from her. It's not that she was undereducated because she chose that or because her family chose that. She was undereducated because she had no educational options. And to grow up in a world like that, I can't imagine to be able to not have the opportunities that we see as just regular everyday opportunities. We wake up, we go to school, and that's normal. But for her, it was normal not to. It was normal to live in a war-ridden country. I read The Women by Kristen Hanna, and that pulls a lot of truthfulness from the American perspective of the Vietnam War and what the nurses saw. But now I'm really curious as to how it was for people who lived through that, who are Vietnamese. I'm curious to see if you have any book recommendations for that. I would be really curious because I couldn't imagine living a life like that. And so we don't just get his story, we also are getting parts of his mother's story and his grandmother's story. So you're getting this really hefty situation, and you're understanding that his grandmother has PTSD, but his mother also has PTSD. And so you're starting to see how that's affecting Little Dog, and how Little Dog has to grow up way faster than any other kid probably around him, because he has to also be taking care of his mother and his grandmother, especially since they're working long hours. You're also seeing him learn how to interact with this world that is not his own. We're seeing how his grandmother and mother have to move to the US and they have to integrate into American culture, and they end up creating their own type of culture, like the sorry culture. And Little Dog ends up talking about how his mother says sorry all the time, and it's almost like an automatic reaction, and it's almost like she's saying sorry for existing, but she also uses it as a tool. And I found that really interesting because she works at a nail salon and she says sorry to get tips, because if they are seen lower or less than the people that they're working for, then those people feel sorry for them, so they're more willing to give tips or give extras. And I thought, wow, that's one, brilliant on their end, but it's also so degrading. But they've learned how to cheat the system and cheat the people that are getting their nails done. And I thought that was really fascinating. And it's definitely, you're starting to see that just because they live in the US doesn't mean they're living in the American culture. They're living in their own world that they've created in the US. And you see that so often even nowadays. You have miniature cultures inside the US, which sometimes is really beautiful, but it's also really tough for different areas. I couldn't imagine having to learn and see how my family kind of reacts to a new world, and then having to implement the things that he's learning in school, which he's being bullied, he's being picked on, he's being seen as somebody who looks different and is different, but he's putting all these pieces together to understand his own life at such a young age. And then we get this transition, so that's a beautiful area. I think that was a beautiful section. I think seeing this integration into a different culture, but also understanding your own culture, but also understanding the pain and suffering that your family have already gone through to get Little Dog just to this place, to a place that's even better than what he had, but may look worse to us, but is better for him. It was really just, whoa. And then we have this interesting transition where we move from seeing how his life is impacted, how he sees and watches so much stuff, to how he sees and watches so much stuff at the farm. So Little Dog ends up taking a job at a farm. He is not supposed to be working there. He's working long hours, but he's trying to also support his family. So you have this young boy who's working on this farm to be able to take care of his family, and he's helping cut down the leaves for cigarettes. I can never remember what is it called? Cigarettes. Tobacco. So he is cutting down tobacco plants and helping the farm hang the tobacco plants in the barn. And we end up seeing kind of how he's watching the people, how he learns how to communicate with them. And they may speak different languages, but there's still communication. There's a community in this area. And he ends up meeting another young boy And these two boys are kind of not, they're not part of the school community, but they've made their own little tiny family together, like in the sense that they're best friends and they are close, they are learning from each other. But we see Little Dog watching Trevor a lot. He sees and watches other people and he learns so much from other people. It's really, really quite interesting. And so we start to see this kind of relationship develop between Trevor and Little Dog, and that ends up being a sexual relationship. However, we end up kind of running into this weird situation where Little Dog knows he's gay. Little Dog knows that he likes men. He's known for a very long time and it's not a question to him. But for Trevor, he's always like, oh, this isn't gay, this isn't gay. But the thing is that Little Dog has no, it almost feels like he doesn't have shame for his sexuality, but he doesn't know how to react to Trevor, and having Trevor in his life is positive. So how do you react to somebody who's constantly putting down something that you truly know about yourself? And I don't think Little Dog is ashamed of it. He shouldn't be ashamed of it, but having somebody be ashamed of it but still partaking, it was a very interesting interaction. And I thought it was so well done, and I couldn't imagine trying to write scenes like this because you're trying to create this depiction. It's like the mother, actually. So at the beginning, we're looking at how the mother absolutely loves the son, but constantly is doing bad things. Now we're looking at how the Little Dog is, it's not exactly the same, but we're looking at Little Dog who knows who he is, but constantly having to hear how it's wrong. And it's interesting. It's not the same at all, but still. So we have these very interesting interactions between these characters, and Little Dog is constantly watching how things are changing and how things are being made around him. And it was quite devastating at times because we're also seeing how Trevor lives in a very violent and negative home, and how he just wants love. That's all he wants. He wants a normal life filled with love, and he can't have that. And he's constantly putting himself in these terrible situations. He's into drugs, he's into other things, he's drinking too much. And you have Little Dog who's actually staying away for the most part, but still so into Trevor that he can't leave it. Like he wants to be with Trevor, but he's constantly seeing Trevor putting himself in these bad situations. And yeah, there's a part of you that wants to hope that Little Dog doesn't get involved. But this is also the first time we see Little Dog have a life of his own and want to continue forward. And he's experiencing life on his own. And there's so much like pain and love, and you just want more for Little Dog. And the ending was kind of different for me. I understand why Ocean Vuong wrote the ending the way he did. The thing is that Little Dog wanted to be more. That was constantly what he wanted to do, and we saw that throughout the story. When his household got negative, he ran away. And it was a runaway to be able to try to get away from this negative situation. But when his grandma showed up, it was like, hey, you need to forgive your mother, and you need to understand that this is hard for her, and that we're going to continue forward. And so you start seeing this pattern of forward momentum and forward movement for him. He starts writing, he starts doing more, he's working at the farm to make money for his family. He's just trying to continue forward. And then he actually does well in school, and he ends up going to college. And that's something that you're just like, good job, Little Dog, good job. And you see the opposite with Trevor. You see his struggle and his pain. You see this unforgettable just realization that this is the reality to some people's lives. And you can go either the way of Little Dog, or you can go the way of Trevor, or you can find kind of a middle between spot. But no matter what, life is not easy and it's messy. And I think this is where I'm having a hard time with this book, is because the end got messy, not in the situation, not in this situation that life is messy, but there was just a lot happening in the end where I started getting kind of things mixed together. So we have the relationship between Trevor and Little Dog, and then Little Dog goes to college and Trevor stays home and starts getting more addicted to things, and drugs end up becoming a very big story. Little Dog ends up talking about how he's lost multiple friends in the last couple of years due to drug addiction and uses, and too much uses. I'm trying to be careful of what I say because I don't want YouTube to get all boo. And then you also have the relationship between Little Dog and his mom, and Little Dog and his grandmother. And then the grandmother ends up passing, which is a terribly sad part of the story. It is so sad. I definitely cried. And Little Dog and his mom go back to Vietnam to spread his mother's or his grandmother's, bury the ashes, I believe is what they did. And Little Dog starts seeing different parts of his culture, of his mother's culture and his grandmother's culture, and the celebration of life, and the fact that if somebody dies in the middle of the night, the people keep dancing and singing around this person. And then he ends up seeing somebody who is who's male, dressed as a woman, and there could have been, I believe they were male dressing as women. So I believe they identified as male but wanted to wear dresses, which, I mean, I think they're called drag queens in the US. They are called drag queens in the US. And I think drag queens here in Germany. I'm not sure if they're considered something else in Vietnam. I can't remember if we discussed that in the book. I don't believe they were transitioning. So we have Little Dog witnessing that, and we kind of have a flashback to him talking to his mother when he came out to his mother, and his mother kind of like rolled it over in her head, and at the end was like, oh, just don't wear dresses. But then he like confesses to us, the reader, that he has worn a dress before. So you kind of start seeing that he's becoming more of who he wants to be. He's discovering his identity, and when he's in Vietnam, he's starting to discover other parts of his identity. We end up finding out about his grandfather. See, this is where it gets messy. At one point, there's just so much happening at the end where I feel like I got a little confused. And this is where the story just kind of lost it for me, which is really unfortunate, but maybe that's on me. So all in all, the end was messy. If you can explain it to me, that'd be fantastic. I do know that like the very end, Little Dog loses his grandmother. They go back to Vietnam. He witnesses that, they come back, and he continues on with his life. He meets his grandfather, who ends up being a support to him, but a different life to him. And you end up seeing how life has affected his mother and how it's been heavy on her. And this whole letter is pretty much a painful letter of confessing some situations and some feelings, but a letter that's never meant to be read. It's not meant to be read by the mother, and it's because it's just his way of getting feelings out. At least that's how I took it. And so I liked it. I think it's a good book. I definitely have to reread it, but I think I have to reread it at a later time. I think I have to work on my ability to read poetry, and work on my ability to understand kind of how the story itself is built together. I think there are some beautiful ideas in this. I think there are some beautiful quotes. I think there's some heavy and wonderful things to discuss. I think there's a lot of discussion that can be had with drugs, violence, political standing, especially right now in the US. I am a supporter of the LGBT community, and I want to express my support and show my love and care for anybody who is in a situation where they don't feel loved and cared. Do know that I am here for you. I know it may not feel like a lot, but there are people out there that love you and care for you and support you. And I hope if you ever need somebody to talk to, you can always come to me, even though you don't know me, but I still want you to know that I am there for you. And if you ever need an ear, I'm here. So I think this is definitely a book that is shining a different light on, especially now. And that's probably where it hit me kind of hard, is understanding that, one, we're looking at immigration into the US but 2, we're also looking at the LGBT community in the US. And that's a really hard topic right now. So, heavy book, lovely book, a book I do recommend. If you haven't read it and you listen to this, congratulations if you followed anything I just said. If you have read it and you listen to this, I hope you were able to get the pieces and parts together, because I know I'm all over the place. This book was hard for me to kind of put together everything. As I mentioned, it's a lot like puzzle pieces, and there's pieces all over the place, and you're still trying to put it together. And even I finished this book. I finished it a week and a half ago, and I've been sitting on it because I've been thinking to myself, 1, how do I discuss it? And 2, do I completely understand what I just read? And I know I don't. And that's okay, because it's one of those novels that I think you can pick up and you read again and you pick up more information, and you pick up and you read again and you get even more information, and you keep building on this story. So I may have not understood it 100%. That's on me, and that's okay. We don't need to understand a book 100% after finishing it. We just need to understand the gist of it, right? I'm gonna say that. We don't need to understand a book 100%. It's a time for us to start building the pieces together. And I'm just putting together the puzzle, and I still have a lot more to put together. So I really liked it. I recommend it for anybody who's looking for a heavier book, who loves poetry. Definitely 100% for you. If you're not into poetry, I still recommend it. It's a book worth picking up, and it's a book that's worth trying to understand, and it's a different structure, and it introduces you into a different world and a different structure as well. So I'm gonna stop there. I've ranted enough, and I also still believe my thoughts are not clear on this book. Maybe I'll continue thinking about it, and maybe at the end of the year I'll have a second read, or maybe next year in February I'll read it again to kind of get a better understanding of the novel, but I don't know yet. So I hope you enjoyed that rant and brain boggle. To be honest, I haven't even written down my thoughts for that book, so this was all raw. This was all word vomit, and I hope that was okay, because like I said, I still don't know how I feel about the book, so it's a very hard one for me. But we're moving on. We are going to be opening our third book of our blind date with a book books. So we have these 10 books, and I think I'm trying to figure out if I'm in the mood for like a thinner book or a fatter book. There's these 2 books here that are like the same width, and my brain and my soul are saying this one. So I think I'm gonna actually read this one. Again, I don't know what they are. My partner wrapped them at the beginning of the year, so that way I would have 12 books to unwrap. All of these books are part of like a TBR of his or mine, and so they're books we owned and that I just haven't read yet. So I'm gonna open this one. Let me put these books down because I don't wanna drop them. Before we open the book, let's go ahead and figure out what we're baking. So we're going to open here. Whoops, that one. So we're gonna be baking these guys. They look like little cookies. Ooh, biscotti al coco facilia. Easy coconut cookies. That sounds like a freaking fantastic thing to bake for spring. And they look so easy, and like I'm gonna eat the whole tray. So these are what we're baking this spring in March. I'm really excited, and I hope you'll hang out and join me in March to see how they go. I'm going to probably eat them all. Just like this chocolate cake over here. All right, book. So, give you the first look. Oh, I had it turned around. Bandit Queens. I bought this book sometime last year, I believe. This one's an interesting one. I don't know how I feel about it. So it's long listed for the Women's Prize for Fiction of 2023. I'm just going to read the first little section so you know what it's about. Gita is believed to have killed her vanished husband, a rumor she hasn't bothered trying to correct. Okay, that's all I'm gonna read. Okay, now I'm excited. I think this will be fun. I think this is going to be very different from Ocean Vuong. On Earth We Were Briefly Gorgeous. I think this is going to be maybe one that's going to be a bit more, I mean, it might be heavy, but I really loved that first sentence. Gita is believed to have killed her vanished husband, a rumor she hasn't bothered trying to correct. See, in my head, I'm like thinking of like those funny, weird movies. This may not be funny, I have no idea. I can't really remember much about this one, but I'm looking forward to picking it up. I'm looking forward to reading it. If you want to read this book with me, go ahead and follow me on Instagram or comment down in the description below. We can read the book together, have discussions on Instagram. I'm always enjoying that. Unfortunately, nobody joined me for this one. That's why I was so all over the place, but that's okay. I get it. That book was a lot. But maybe you want to read The Bandit Queens with me, and if you do, let me know so that way we can have a little discussions on Instagram. And yeah, okay, so what we're doing is we're making some coconut cookies from Melissa Forti's baking book, and we're going to be reading The Bandit Queens by Parina Schroff. And I am looking forward to that. So that's it. That's this month's a kind of messy review of our blind date with a book of February and our blind date with a book of February. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know if you did. Let me know if you guys like this challenge. It's definitely making me pick up some books that I may have been putting off to the side for a really long time, like The Bandit Queens or Ocean Vuong's On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. And yeah, so thank you so much for joining me. If you guys do like this challenge, make sure you subscribe because I'm going to be posting the challenge on the 1st of every month. So March's challenge will be posted on April 1st. So you'll be able to review or see a review of these two things then. And so make sure you subscribe if you like it. If you like other baking book and cozy content, make sure you subscribe because that's what I mostly post. And if you just want to hang out in this fun little community, make sure you subscribe because we're just a fun little community that talk about hefty books sometimes. So until next time, you guys, I hope you have a fantastic day, a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you guys next time. Ciao!